Okay, yesterday we started learning about the dinim of Kedusha of the Beis HaKnesses, the Kedusha of a Shul, and we ended up discussing at the end about making a church into a Shul, or also where do you sit where's the Aruch Kodesh in the Shul, and where does the Rabbi sit, and where do the elders of the community sit. There's a lot of discussion in Halacha. So number one, there's a big argument in Halacha, like we were discussing yesterday, if you're allowed to make from a church into a shul. So some poskim write a permanent shul you're not allowed to, some write that you are allowed to. The Pearl Dominic today is, in many places, there's a lot of shuls that we know used to be churches. There's a lot of Chabad schools, yeshivas, that used to be around the world, that used to be monasteries and churches and all that. So the Pearl Dominic is that you do. Some people hold that if you want to buy it off a church or something like that, the best thing would be for the church to sell it to another person, and then the person sells it to the shul. Then the shul is not buying it directly from the church, the shul is buying it from another individual. But the bottom line is that they're lenient about all these things anyway. Now, another interesting thing about the Aruch Kodesh, we said yesterday, once the Aruch Kodesh is in place, unless if you do it on a condition, it has to stay where it is. So some poskim write that as long as it's in the same room, it doesn't matter where you move it, as long as it's in the same wall, you can move it. But a lot of poskim say you shouldn't move the Aruch Kodesh once it's in its place. You should keep it there, and not to move it unless if you l'chatchila make it on a condition that you're going to be able to move it. That's what we were learning and discussing yesterday. Now, what?
What's the meaning of not having the Aruch Kodesh all the way up?
Why is it not having it all? Yeah. Why do you put it all the way up?
I mean, if it's practical to put it all the way up.
So you do put it all the way up?
No, but there's chairs behind you, a table,
That's for the bima.
They're for the bima, not for Aruch Kodesh.
What did I say? I meant the bima, yeah.
Well, you said Aruch Kodesh.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Aruch Kodesh is supposed to be all the way in front of the shul, because you don't want people sitting with their backs to the, What's the purpose of a bima?
No, you said yesterday, it's a reform conservative to have the bima all the way up.
Or the cloisters, yeah. Or the church. Yeah. Where did they get it from? In the Chassam Sofer screams a lot about all these things that Chassam Sofer lived in a time when he was very much against the Haskalah movement. So a lot of things he was very fanatic about. What?
Well, why is it a problem buying the church directly from the church? Idol worship?
Yeah, because it was a place that had idols in it and had idol worshipping in it. And
are you allowed to sell the Knesset to the church?
No, you're not allowed to sell a Beis Knesses to a church in any way whatsoever. Even though a lot of times, especially years ago, not like today where people are too cheap to give money for a shul. Then the shuls were massive buildings. Remember that years ago, then you look in Europe or even in Brownsville or East LA, the shuls were massive shuls. And then the neighborhood changed, it became a colorful neighborhood, to speak properly. It became a colorful neighborhood, and then who's going to buy a shul? The only thing would be good for is a church. So Allah is clear that you're not allowed. You have to knock it down. If you knock down the shul, then the land, it doesn't matter. Then they could put up a church in the land. I never saw that shul, but remember my father had a lot of issues in Chicago. The shul used to be on the west side of Chicago. The west side of Chicago was, at that time, a Yiddish neighborhood. And then it became switched to colorful. And all the Jews were out. And there was a big shul there called Bnei Ruvain, which is now on the north side of town, where my father was there for many years. It's still there. So that shul was on the west side. It was a big shul that had like 1,100 seats. I mean, it was a massive shul. High ceiling. I never saw it, but this is what I heard. And when the neighborhood changed, so they wanted to sell the shul. There was no minyan, there was nothing, no Jews left over there. And the Balabatim wanted to sell it for a church. My father was fighting with them, and he told them even more. In that shul, in 1942, when the previous Rebbe was in Chicago, it's called Beaker Chicago, he said a mimer and he davened in that shul. In that shul, B'nai Reuven, he said a mimer and he davened. So my father told about that shul where the previous Rebbe said a mimer and he davened, you want to get insult to our church. Lepel what he got, Lepel what he did at the end, they knocked down the building completely and then they sold the property to whoever. But it's an open din shchunach. You're not allowed to sell a shul. Can you imagine selling a shul to a place of Avodah Zarah? It's completely against halacha. Now, the Aron Kodesh is supposed to be in the shul, supposed to be in the direction where you're supposed to be davening. Okay? So, if you're here in America, we daven east, because that's facing Yerushalayim. If you're south of Yerushalayim, you daven north. If you're north, you daven south. If you're east, you daven west. If you're west, you daven east. But Lebrel, today we daven Mizrach, right? So we daven east. So Halachos says that the Aron Kodesh, or the Sefer Torah, which is the direction where every people daven, should also be facing east. Now what happens if the Aron Kodesh is facing in another direction, like a few big shuls here in town are facing south rather than east? So now the question is like this. When you're davening in the shul, do you face the direction of the Aron Kodesh, which is not the proper direction where you should be facing during davening? By the way, davening means Shmoneh Esrei, because the rest of davening doesn't matter where you face. Okay, for Shmoneh Esrei you have to face east. For Psukei Zimmer, Shema, you can be sitting like the prominent people sit on the Mizrach wall, right, the eastern wall, and they face the crowd, which is brought down Shchunah, that's the way it's supposed to be. That the Zekanim, the scholars, the elderly people, the prominent people, are supposed to face on the Mizrach wall, on the eastern wall, which is on the same side of the Aron Kodesh, and they face the people. But obviously, Shmoneh Esrei, you have to face in the direction of the Aron Kodesh. So we discussed this already. It's a very interesting story that happened with the Rebbe. That when the Rebbe went up to visit camp in Tafshin Yud Zayin, which was 1957, the Rebbe went to camp, and then in the overnight camp, and there was a rec room, so to speak, where they did they davened and they did activities. There was a multi-purpose room that they also davened in. And the Aron Kodesh was not was facing in a certain direction. That's what everybody faced when they davened. The Rebbe came to daven Mincha in that camp. So before Mincha, the Rebbe asked, which way is east? They didn't have phones with compasses. The Rebbe said to them, which way is east? Nobody knew. So the Rebbe walked outside. It was Mincha time. So the Rebbe looked outside and he saw where the sun was setting. The sun sets in the west. So the Rebbe saw where the sun's setting. So it's obvious if the sun is setting there, then east is this way. So the Rebbe, interesting, faced for Shmoneh Esrei, he faced east, not the direction where the Aron Kodesh was, which was a very interesting thing, because some people say you should still face the Aron Kodesh anyway. But the bottom line is that that's what the Rebbe did, and he faced east rather than facing the direction the Aron Kodesh is. But l'chatchila, you need to make sure that the Aron Kodesh is in the proper place.
So if you're in a shul that everyone is davening and the Aron Kodesh is not in the right place, you go with them? It looks funny if you're looking at. There's
countless letters from the Rebbe about customs that Chabad does that other people are doing differently, and if you're going to do a different custom, if you're going to do the Chabad custom, it's going to cause fights. So there's one exception when the Rebbe said that you should fight even though that's wearing a talis Friday night for davening, or any time at night. The Chazan in all shuls wear talesim Friday night, Saturday, whatever. And the Rebbe said that you have to fight for because it's against halacha. But anyway, so the Rebbe says, Gadol HaShalom, peace is great, and therefore you don't do things that are going to stick up and cause a machlekes, cause a fight. So when people want to do things, you have a lot of people that like to show, you see, I'm going to be different than everybody else. Some people, by the way, love to be different than everybody else, break the system, not be part of the system, it's part of their ego trips. Anyway, so then, if it's going to cause a problem, so there's ways of dealing with it that you face a little like this, you know what I mean? If you're not interested in making a machlekes, you could do it without the whole world knowing that that's what you did. But to make an official statement, everybody's facing this way, and you're going to go face this way, just to show that I'm, better than everybody else, that's babish against halacha. Fighting is worse than facing the wrong direction for Shemona Esrei. Because in Shulchan Aruch it says, what happens if somebody's traveling and they don't know which way is Mizrach? They don't know which way. Huh? No, so it says, in that case, when you can't find out, you face any direction and have in mind wherever the tefillahs go through. Why do we face east, by the way? Why do we face Yerushalayim? Because the Gemara says all the tefillahs go through Yerushalayim. Even now, all the tefillahs we do go through the Beis HaMikdash. But
what if you're in a shul and they wear a talis during Mincha? Chazan, say Kaddish?
no. You want to be the chazan?
Let's say.
Then you don't be the chazan.
If you have somebody has a chiyuv, it's mincha, not mine. Mincha's easier.
Mincha is before Shkia. Mincha is not a problem. I've mentioned this millions of times already, but officially Chabad custom is single guys don't wear talesim. Even if they get called up to the Torah, even if they daven for the Yomid, even if they do, our minig is that single guys don't wear Ashkenazi, right? We don't wear talesim. So people are like, no, I'm not putting on talis. I mean, holy wars, this is where they fight the holy wars. It so happens that in 770, downstairs, in the Rebbe's Shabbos Minyan, there was a few times a bacher, like this, Rabbi Shusterman, not me, the other Shusterman, Rabbi Matel Shusterman, he was the official bacher by the Rebbe's Minyan. A few times I was there myself. A few times he wasn't there for whatever reason. So his son, Gershon, who lives on the other side of town, who was a bacher then, laned. Instead of his father, he laned. And when he laned in 770, in the Rebbe's Minyan, with the Rebbe getting called up to the Aliyah, he was told by the Rabbanim to wear a talis, and that's what he did. Okay? There are a few times that a bar mitzvah boy, rarely, because officially Chabad custom is not to get the first Aliyah Shabbos morning, but there are a few exceptions that a bar mitzvah boy got an Aliyah Shabbos when I was there then, when I was a bach many, many years ago, and the kid wore a talis to the Aliyah. Ashkenazi, not the Ashkenazi kid was told to wear a talis by the Aliyah.
Mendel used to learn with his
Years ago, everybody got an Aliyah, bach, they put on a talis. They laned, they put on a talis.
That was a Chabad custom?
But not to wear, to wear.
To wear?
No, everybody else wears. Chabad officially doesn't.
Oh.
Like in the Bachman's Minyan, no, not the Chazan, not the laner, nobody wears a talis. No, if you get an Aliyah, nothing.
So it's
What?
The Balabat is Sheminyan, so then he does wear talis without a bracha.
Yeah, without a bracha.
And if it's a minyan that's mixed?
What do you mean mixed? If it's going to cause people to make comments, nasty comments, or be upset, then you don't do. Then you wear a talis. That's why I always made the guys wear talesim here, because they were balabatim. That for them it looked very strange, and they commented about it. So you don't do things that make machlekes.